After the fumble, he comes over to Andy. He goes, keep me in. What happened is, on the fumble, he was not in the game. Noah Gray went in, and he had to block.
This encounter was an innocent mistake, according to the official story. But the truth about what really happened between Travis Kelce and Andy Reid that day has been buried, until now. The shocking confrontation on IG Live will change everything. Could this be the last straw? The explosion that shook the dynasty. It started with what looked like a routine sideline exchange, the kind of fiery back and forth you might expect from two men who have built one of the NFL's most successful dynasties. But by the time NBC's cameras zoomed in, the image was anything but routine. 36-year-old Travis Kelce, the most decorated tight end of his generation, chest to chest with his 67-year-old head coach Andy Reid in a heated shouting match that had the entire football world asking the same question: what just happened on that Kansas City Chiefs sideline? On September 21st, 2025, in front of more than 82,000 fans at MetLife Stadium and millions more watching at home, the Chiefs, already battered by their worst start in over a decade, found themselves in another offensive nightmare. The scoreboard read 6-0. Kansas City's only points coming off field goals. And with another stalled drive ending in frustration, the cameras caught something unprecedented. It wasn't Kelce this time making the first move. It was Andy Reid. Instead of diffusing tension, the head coach, known for his calm demeanor, leaned in, delivering what witnesses described as an aggressive chest bump that left Kelce visibly startled. In seconds, the conversation spiraled into a shouting match, their body language raw and volatile. The optics were jarring. Reid, usually the steady presence on the sideline, was now the one escalating the confrontation. The head coach would eventually write it off as Travis being emotional.
He's an emotional guy. He's Irish, Just sometimes I have to be the policeman.
That was Kelce days later, trying to own his part in the firestorm. But in the moment, what fans saw looked like chaos on the verge of exploding. The veteran tight end's face showed genuine shock. This wasn't the Reid he knew. For over a decade, Reid had been the calming influence, the steady hand that guided Kelce through his emotional storms. Now suddenly, Reid was the one bringing the storm. Clips instantly spread across X, formerly Twitter, and YouTube. But then came the twist that would define the narrative. Headlines claimed Kelce had finally confronted Andy Reid on IG Live. The problem? It never happened. The entire confrontation was a classic case of how modern media transforms reality into viral fiction. As The Athletic reported, the incident was strictly a sideline confrontation broadcast on NBC, not a live stream on Instagram. Yet within hours, IG Live was trending worldwide as clickbait titles blurred the lines between a televised clash and social media drama. The misinformation spread faster than the actual footage, creating a narrative that would overshadow the real story. To fuel the fire further, a forensic lip reader hired by Daily Mail claimed Reid could be seen yelling, "Tell me why I shouldn't kick you off." How about that? A supposed threat to cut his star player. Whether accurate or not, the lip-reading interpretation became gospel truth across social media platforms, shared and reshared millions of times. Suddenly, this wasn't just a sideline spat. It was a full-blown narrative of a dynasty tearing apart from within. The context surrounding this explosion made it even more combustible. The Chiefs weren't just losing, they were unraveling in ways that seemed impossible just months earlier. Entering the game at 0-2, Kansas City was off to their worst start since Reid arrived back in 2013, when he inherited a franchise coming off a 2-14 disaster. Their once explosive offense was averaging just 17.5 points per game, a stunning fall from the high-flying juggernaut that had defined an era of dominance. Travis himself had this to say during his podcast.
Sometimes those emotions get away from me, man, and that's been the battle of my career. But everybody else, I don't give a what anybody else says. I talked to Coach Reid about it too.
This wasn't just a statistical dip. It represented a fundamental shift in identity. The Chiefs had built their reputation on explosive plays, creative play calling, and the ability to score from anywhere on the field. Now they were grinding out field goals and struggling to find the end zone. The frustration was palpable, not just from Kelce, but from an entire organization that had grown accustomed to excellence. Patrick Mahomes, the Golden Boy quarterback who seemed immune to pressure and criticism, was now posting a 62.5% completion rate, the lowest of his career at that point. The stats told only part of the story. His mechanics looked off, his timing with receivers was inconsistent, and the magical improvisation that had made him a superstar seemed forced and desperate rather than natural and effortless. At the center of it all was Kelce, battling not just opposing defenses, but time itself. Through 2 games, he had only 6 catches for 45 yards, numbers that didn't just look bad, they looked symbolic of decline. For a player who had redefined the tight end position, who had been the security blanket for Mahomes throughout their championship runs, these numbers numbers represented more than poor performance. They represented the end of an era. The decline wasn't just statistical. Kelce's body language on the field had changed. The explosive first step was still there, but not quite as explosive. The route running was still precise, but defenses were anticipating his movements better. Father Time, that undefeated opponent that claims every athlete eventually, was knocking on his door with increasing persistence. For years, their clashes had followed a familiar pattern. Kelce loses his cool, Reid steadies the ship. It was a dynamic as predictable as it was effective. Kelce would explode with passion, sometimes crossing the line into disrespect, and Reid would absorb the heat while maintaining his composure. It worked because both men understood their roles in the relationship. But this time, Reid flipped the script entirely. He was the one to initiate the bump, the shove, the physicality. He was the one raising his voice first, setting the aggressive tone that would define the confrontation. And that small but dramatic reversal made the incident far more shocking to anyone who had followed their relationship over the years. As Sportskeeda noted, cameras caught every second of the exchange. Reid leaning forward with unusual aggression, jabbing his message home with his chest. Kelce recoiling in genuine disbelief before firing back with words of his own. It was a stunning image that challenged everything fans thought they knew about the dynamic between the NFL's most respected coach and its most iconic tight end. What made the incident even more significant was the timing. This wasn't happening during a meaningless preseason game or a blowout loss where emotions might naturally run high. This was happening during a crucial early season game, with the Chiefs already facing questions about their ability to compete for another championship. Every play mattered, every decision was magnified, and every emotion was amplified by the stakes involved. The crowd at MetLife Stadium sensed the significance of the moment. The stadium, which had been relatively quiet during another sluggish Chiefs drive, suddenly came alive as fans realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Giants fans, already celebrating their team's strong defensive performance, began chanting and pointing toward the Kansas City sideline. It was the kind of moment that transcends individual games and becomes part of NFL folklore. These questions would only grow more pressing in the days and weeks that followed, as analysts dissected every frame of the confrontation and speculated about what it revealed about the state of the Chiefs' locker room. The incident had opened a window into the private dynamics of a dynasty, and what fans saw wasn't necessarily what they expected. The explosive history that led to breaking point. This wasn't the first time Travis Kelce lost control in front of the cameras, and it certainly wasn't the first time Andy Reid had to weather one of his star players' emotional storms. The September 2025 sideline explosion was just the latest and most dramatic chapter in a history of confrontations that have defined their relationship, each incident building toward this inevitable breaking point, each one more intense and more public than the last. The pattern that would define their relationship began to emerge during the 2023 season, specifically on Christmas Day, when the Chiefs faced the Las Vegas Raiders in what should have been a celebratory showcase game. Instead, it became a nightmare that exposed cracks in the dynasty's foundation. The Chiefs were unraveling in front of a national audience, dropping a humiliating 20-14 loss to the Las Vegas Raiders, a division rival that had been dominated by Kansas City for years. Kelce's production was sliding precipitously. The offense was sputtering without rhythm or creativity, and frustration had been building for weeks. But it was on that Christmas Day sideline where the world first saw the depth of Kelce's emotional volatility. Cameras caught him ripping off his helmet with violent force and slamming it to the turf with enough power to make it bounce twice before rolling to a stop. The image was jarring. A superstar player having what could only be described as a tantrum on the sideline while his team struggled. Reid's response was telling and would establish the pattern that would define their relationship for the next 2 years. He didn't yell at Kelce. He didn't embarrass him in front of the team. Instead, he quietly walked over, picked up the helmet, and sat Kelce for exactly one play, just enough to send a message without causing a larger scene. ESPN's game recap noted that the Chiefs had lost 4 of their last 6 games at that point. Their lowest scoring stretch in years. The offensive struggles weren't just about one bad game. They represented a systematic breakdown of the machine that had dominated the NFL for years. CBS Sports highlighted how the helmet slam went viral instantly, with fans calling it Kelce's Christmas tantrum and questioning whether the tight end was becoming a distraction rather than a solution. The Christmas incident established Reid's approach to managing Kelce's emotions: absorb the heat, minimize the damage, and move forward without public confrontation. It was a strategy born of necessity. Kelce was too valuable to cut, too talented to bench indefinitely, and too important to the team's success to alienate. But it also set a precedent that would prove problematic. Kelce could explode without serious consequences. If Christmas 2023 was a warning shot, Super Bowl LV8 on February 11, 2024 was a full-scale detonation that nearly overshadowed the biggest game in football. The Chiefs were facing the San Francisco 49ers on the grandest biggest stage in sports, with over 100 million viewers watching worldwide. But instead of showcasing championship poise, the game became remembered as much for Kelce's sideline meltdown as for the eventual overtime victory. The situation had been building throughout the first half. The Chiefs' offense, which had been explosive throughout the playoffs, was completely stifled by San Francisco's aggressive defense. At halftime, Kelce had managed just one catch for 1 yard, statistically invisible in the biggest game of his career. But the breaking point came when Reid removed him from the field during a crucial red zone play, choosing to go with a different personnel package. That decision, made in the heat of competition and based on matchup considerations, pushed Kelce completely over the edge. The cameras captured every second of what followed. Kelce stormed across the sideline with murder in his eyes, finding Reid hunched over his whiteboard trying to make halftime adjustments and delivering a shoulder-to-chest bump that nearly knocked the 65-year-old coach off his feet. But the physical contact was just the beginning. Kelce then grabbed Reid's arm and unleashed a torrent of profanity-laced screaming that could be heard even over the crowd noise. The raw audio, captured by the hot microphones that follow coaches during the Super Bowl, revealed the full extent of Kelce's fury. He wasn't just frustrated, he was enraged, demanding targets, questioning play calls, and treating his Hall of Fame coach like an incompetent coordinator. The image was unprecedented in Super Bowl history, a superstar player physically and verbally assaulting his coach during halftime of the championship game. NBC Sports replayed the confrontation multiple times during the broadcast, with commentators struggling to explain what they had just witnessed. Social media exploded instantly, with at NFL_memes posting, "Travis Kelce just yeeted Andy Reid," a clip that garnered 2.3 million views within hours. What made the incident even more dramatic was the immediate aftermath. Reid, visibly shaken and red-faced, had to compose himself and return to preparing his team for the second half of the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift, watching from the luxury suite and clearly distressed by what she had witnessed, was caught on camera, covering her mouth in shock and appearing to ask someone near her what had just happened. The optics were terrible for everyone involved. Millions of casual fans who only watch football during the playoffs were witnessing the ugly side of championship-level competition. Children watching with their families saw a player they might idolize completely losing control and disrespecting authority. The NFL's carefully crafted image of professionalism and sportsmanship was being shattered in real time on its biggest stage. Reid's immediate response revealed the depth of their relationship's dysfunction. Instead of benching Kelce or confronting him publicly, Reid chose to minimize the situation. During his halftime interview, he described it as competitive fire and insisted that he loved Kelce's passion. It was damage control, but it also sent a message that this behavior was acceptable as long as it came from a star player. The Chiefs did go on to win the game in overtime, which allowed the organization to frame the confrontation as evidence of championship passion rather than troubling dysfunction. Kelce himself tried to control the narrative on his New Heights podcast 3 days later, offering what sounded like a carefully crafted apology. "I was out of line. I just wanted to let him know I'm here to fight for him." But the damage to their relationship and public image had been done. The Super Bowl confrontation established a new baseline for what was considered acceptable behavior, and it raised serious questions about Reid's ability to control his locker room's most volatile personality. The warning signs had actually been visible even before these high-profile incidents. During training camp in the summer of 2023, Kelce had been involved in not one but two separate physical altercations in consecutive days, incidents that should have served as red flags for the organization but were largely dismissed as training camp intensity. The first incident involved a shoving match with cornerback DiCaprio Bootle after a red zone drill that got heated. Players getting chippy during practice isn't unusual, but Kelce's reaction was disproportionate to the situation. Instead of walking away or letting coaches handle the situation, he escalated the confrontation until teammates had to physically separate the players. The next day brought an even more troubling incident. During a passing drill, Kelce dropped a routine catch, the kind of mistake that happens dozens of times during any practice. But instead of simply running back to the huddle, he channeled his frustration into violence, throwing a full-force left-handed punch directly at linebacker Jack Cochran's helmet. This tolerance created a dangerous precedent. Andy Reid, despite his reputation for demanding accountability, was clearly operating under different rules when it came to his star tight end. The same coach who had once forced an offensive lineman to push a 500-pound blocking sled the length of the field as punishment before cutting him the next day was now allowing Kelce to assault teammates without consequence. The pattern was clear and troubling. Kelce's behavior was escalating. The incidents were becoming more public, and the organization's response was becoming more permissive. It was a recipe for the kind of explosive confrontation that would eventually occur on September 21st, 2025. Reid's evolution in handling Kelce revealed a fundamental change in his coaching philosophy. Early in his career, Reid built his reputation on demanding accountability from every player, regardless of talent level. He was known for having clear standards and consistent enforcement, but Kelce represented a different challenge. A player whose talent was so exceptional and whose chemistry with Mahomes was so crucial that normal disciplinary measures seemed insufficient. As The Guardian explained, their relationship evolved into something more complex than traditional coach-player dynamics. It became less about discipline and more about emotional negotiations, a delicate balance where Reid absorbed Kelce's emotional explosions in exchange for elite performance on the field. The system worked, but only because both parties understood their roles. Kelce could explode, vent his frustrations, and even cross lines of respect, knowing that Reid would absorb the heat and protect him from serious consequences. Reid, meanwhile, tolerated behavior that would have gotten other players cut because he believed the results justified the process. It was a cycle that repeated itself with predictable regularity. Kelce would snap under pressure. Reid would absorb the explosion without retaliating. Kelce would offer some form of apology or explanation, and then both would move forward with their focus on winning games. The pattern worked for over a decade because it was based on mutual benefit. Kelce got emotional release and continued opportunity, while Reid got championship-level production when dynasties reached their breaking point. When the cameras cut away from Travis Kelce and Andy Reid's sideline explosion in September 2025, the story didn't end. In many ways, it was only the beginning, because this was never just about a chest bump between a coach and player. It wasn't just about a bad drive or even a disappointing start to the season. This confrontation represented something much more profound: the weight of legacy crushing down on aging legends, the strain of modern celebrity culture on traditional sports relationships, and the eternal question that every dynasty eventually must answer: when does the passion that builds greatness become the fire that destroys it? Understanding the true significance of this moment requires examining the impossible pressures that both men were facing as their legendary partnership entered what many observers believed could be its final chapter. At 36, Travis Kelce wasn't just another veteran trying to squeeze out one more productive season before retirement. He was a first-ballot Hall of Famer, a three-time Super Bowl champion, and the player who had fundamentally redefined what it meant to play tight end in the modern NFL. But that extraordinary legacy came with crushing pressure that intensified with every passing game. Every catch, every route, every emotional outburst was now viewed through the lens of legacy preservation. When Kelce hauled in 6 catches for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, it was hailed as proof that Father Time remained undefeated but hadn't claimed another victim yet. When he struggled to 45 yards over 2 games, it became ammunition for narratives about inevitable decline and the end of an era. The statistical decline was undeniable and painful to watch for anyone who had followed Kelce's career. Through the first 2 games of the 2025 season, his numbers weren't just bad, they were historically poor for a player of his caliber. 6 catches for 45 yards represented the worst 2-game stretch of his career since his rookie season over a decade earlier. More troubling than the raw numbers was what they represented: the first concrete evidence that time was winning its battle against talent. Kelce's body language on the field told an even more concerning story than his statistics. The explosive first step off the line of scrimmage was still there, but it lacked the suddenness that had terrorized linebackers and safeties for over a decade. His route running remained technically sound, but defenses were anticipating his movements with increasing accuracy. The separation that had made him virtually uncoverable was shrinking incrementally but measurably with each game. Suddenly, every sideline outburst wasn't just analyzed by ESPN and NFL Network, but dissected by TMZ, Entertainment Tonight, and a constellation of celebrity gossip platforms. Every emotional moment was viewed through multiple lenses. Was this passion for the game, or was the pressure of dating the world's biggest pop star affecting his focus? The scrutiny was relentless and unprecedented, creating a media circus that followed Kelce everywhere he went. The celebrity factor also introduced logistical complications that Reid had never had to navigate in over 3 decades of coaching. Kelce's schedule now included podcast commitments that had evolved into a media empire, brand endorsement obligations that brought in millions but demanded time and energy, and the simple reality that his every public appearance generated paparazzi attention that most NFL players never experienced. As Yahoo Sports noted, Kelce consistently insisted that his focus on football hadn't wavered despite his expanded celebrity status, but the mathematics were unavoidable. Time and energy spent on non-football activities was time and energy that couldn't be devoted to the obsessive preparation that had made him great. For Reid, a coach who came up in an era where players lived and died by football alone, managing a superstar whose fame stretched into global pop culture represented an entirely new kind of challenge that tested even his legendary patience and adaptability. The pressure wasn't just affecting Kelce individually, it was was rippling through the entire Chiefs organization. Reid found himself fielding questions about Taylor Swift's attendance at games, about Kelce's media commitments, about whether the circus surrounding his star player was becoming a distraction from the team's championship goals. These weren't questions that Vince Lombardi or Bill Belichick ever had to answer, but they had become part of Reid's weekly reality. Understanding the September 2025 explosion also requires placing it within the broader context of how legendary partnerships handle the pressure of sustained excellence. The confrontation between Kelce and Reid was shocking to fans because of who they were, the steady coach and the fiery tight end, two icons who had built a dynasty together through mutual respect and complementary personalities. But history reveals that their situation wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that has defined the greatest partnerships in sports history. The closest NFL comparison comes from New England, where Tom Brady and Bill Belichick ruled the league for 2 decades with 6 Super Bowl victories, countless playoff appearances, and an unmatched dynasty that set the standard for modern football excellence. But behind those championship rings and public displays of mutual respect was constant tension that eventually destroyed their partnership. Belichick's cold, militaristic coaching style increasingly clashed with Brady's desire for recognition, respect, and autonomy as he aged and accumulated accomplishments. Reports surfaced regularly of heated arguments in team meetings, with Brady growing tired of Belichick's refusal to treat him as anything more than just another player, despite his obvious status as the greatest quarterback of all time. The breaking point came not through a single dramatic confrontation, but through the slow erosion of trust and respect. Brady wanted more input in offensive decisions. Belichick insisted on maintaining complete control. Brady desired public acknowledgement of his contributions. Belichick remained committed to his team-first messaging that minimized individual accomplishments. By 2020, the cracks had become irreparable fissures, leading to Brady's departure for Tampa Bay, where he promptly won another Super Bowl and proved he didn't need Belichick to continue performing at an elite level. The parallel to Kelce and Reid was striking and ominous. Like Brady and Belichick, they were bound together by unprecedented success, but increasingly strained by the weight of time, ego, and the natural evolution of their relationship. The difference was that while Brady and Belichick's tension simmered beneath the surface for years before exploding, Kelce and Reid's conflicts had always been more visible and volatile. The lesson for Kelce and Reid was clear and troubling. Volatile partnerships don't always kill success immediately, but eventually, the fire that fuels greatness becomes the fire that consumes it. The question facing the Chiefs was whether they could learn from history or were doomed to repeat it. But this viral explosion wasn't confined to traditional NFL audiences. The Taylor Swift factor brought an entirely different demographic into the conversation. Swifties, the global army of Taylor Swift supporters who typically showed little interest in football beyond their idol's attendance at Chiefs games. Many defended Kelce aggressively, framing Reid as the aggressor and arguing that the coach was unfairly targeting their beloved celebrity's boyfriend. Others turned the incident into ammunition for existing fan-based conflicts, suggesting that the Chiefs' drama was overshadowing Swift's own career achievements and tour announcements. The collision between hardcore football fans and global pop culture enthusiasts created a viral frenzy unlike anything the NFL had previously experienced. Traditional sports analysts found themselves engaging with entertainment reporters. Football strategy discussions merged with celebrity gossip, and the line between sports journalism and tabloid coverage became increasingly blurred. The incident demonstrated how modern sports controversies can explode far beyond their original context to become broader cultural moments. The Christmas Day helmet slam of 2023, the Super Bowl confrontation of 2024, and the September sideline explosion of 2025 weren't separate incidents. They were chapters in a larger story about the price of greatness and the human cost of sustained excellence. These moments didn't diminish the dynasty's achievements. In many ways, they revealed what made those achievements possible in the first place. The same passionate intensity that drove Reid to innovate constantly and Kelce to demand perfection also created the emotional volatility that occasionally erupted into public confrontations. The fire that fueled championships also generated the heat that threatened to melt down everything they had built together. It was a paradox that defined not just their relationship, but the entire Chiefs organization. Greatness achieved through controlled chaos, success built on barely managed intensity. Whether they could navigate this paradox successfully through the remainder of their partnership would determine not just their individual legacies, but the future trajectory of one of the NFL's most successful franchises. The September confrontation had revealed the cracks in their foundation, but it remained unclear whether those cracks represented fatal structural damage or simply stress marks on a relationship strong enough to withstand the pressure of sustained excellence. And survival, in the unforgiving world of professional sports, is the ultimate test of greatness. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.